Yeah.
Oh, sweet. Answered that.
Thank you for the reminder. All right, so welcome to New Yorkers for Mental Health Alternatives. We are, you guys have not been here before, right? So all three of you are first time attendees. Great, love it. And there's a couple new faces online as well. Thank you for dialing in. So for those of you who've found your way here by accident, New Yorkers for Mental Health Alternatives is an advocacy group. We are working to create change in the legal system here in New York around psilocybin-containing mushrooms and other psychedelics, MDMA, LSD, any medicine that people are using to try healing from the things that are impacting them. I feel like they should have access to. And we have been working tirelessly, meeting with various legislators, and this group is one of the ways we, are kind of generating ideas and ways to move forward. So, Kevin, I talked to Joe very briefly in Florida about his video with Reconsider. Do you know if that I was looking on their website, I didn't see it posted anywhere. Do you know if that's available to share?
It is not yet. So for context for everyone, Reconsider is an organization that has leading it the gentleman who directed the movie Fantastic Fungi, which was a great documentary film about mushrooms. And he has a series, if you go to, I believe, reconsider.org, a series of videos, sort of testimonials, people talking about their use of psychedelic mushrooms. And for this next season, he decided to do longer format short films. Previously, they used to be maybe 6 to 8 minutes. Now they're more like 12 to 20 minutes. Joe's is 18, and it includes footage of archival footage, you name it. So
wow. So for those of you who don't
unfortunately, we were going to try to get it out today, 9/11, but decision was made to hold off time for us to order doing in New York City.
You're breaking up a little bit, Kevin. We can't really hear you. Maybe you're going through a mountain pass or something.
Florida, but now we're no good.
Okay, well, maybe we'll go back to Kevin, but just so cluster busters, for those of you who don't know, cluster headaches are an affliction that impacts quite a few people across the country. I know Kevin has more statistics, but we can't really kind of quote them right now, although I did have some flyers that I was going to share. But LSD and psilocybin are two of the only substances that actually stop a cluster headache from coming on and impacting them. And Joe McKay, who I was just referencing, he is a 9/11 responder, a former NY Fire Department officer, and he worked on the pile for months and then started suffering from these cluster headaches. And, long story short, he started taking psilocybin and it stopped his headaches. It allowed him to process his PTSD, and it also helped him get off of the opioids that he had been prescribed to try to mitigate his headaches that didn't work. And so Joe has been working with Kevin and the rest of the Cluster Busters group across the country to advocate for psilocybin and psychedelic advocacy accessibility. And one of the things that they recently did is presented to the California legislation. And if you haven't heard, California passed a decrim bill that is psilocybin, I don't think ibogaine, but a handful of other natural medicines in their assembly and Senate. And the bill is sitting on Governor Gavin Newsom's desk. So if you know anyone in California, please tell them to send Gavin Newsom an email in support of signing this bill. I'm assuming you're here and you support that, so that's what I'm saying. So, Kevin sent along a draft and a specific email that it should go to. Maybe I'll try to drop that in the chat in a little bit. I think the deadline, unfortunately, is tonight by midnight, but probably
the deadline is tonight.
It is okay. Yeah, but it's if California decriminalizes, that would be huge for the country. Like that would be absolutely huge. And I mean, that would be really exciting. So those were two of the things that I wanted to talk about. I mean, what Kevin we kind of broke up, but the Reconsider folks, they have a host, a bank of videos that they've already recorded from social workers to nurses and doctors and police officers who have all benefited from psilocybin as a medicine. And when we were meeting with legislators, I mean, Joe was there in person, and if Joe tells you his story, I mean, you're crying by the end of the story. But there were so many legislators that didn't have time to stop, and that's why we wanted to have his story as a resource. Not that the other stories were less impactful, but I mean, you know, Joe has a phenomenal way of talking, you know, and telling his story, and you know, it's the trifecta. He has the what does he call it? The triple hat or whatever. You know, he's you know the physical pain, the emotional trauma, and the addiction cessation. So it's like, you know, the psilocybin has benefited him in those three different ways. So what are some other, the other announcements? So Cluster Busters just had their annual gathering in Florida down at Disney Springs in Orlando, and they advocate, as I said, for all kinds of accessibility for different psychedelics. And I was able to attend and give everyone a lesson on how to grow top fruiting, dung-loving mushrooms of whatever kind they may try to cultivate. That went really well, and again, thank you, Kevin, for inviting us to come down. And I'm really excited that people appreciated that lesson. Another thing that has happened recently, and I know I mentioned this last month, but the article for Mycofile. So I'm now the psilocybin correspondent for the Committee of Medicinal Mushrooms for North American Mycological Association. And they have a quarterly magazine that goes to 90 different groups. Thank you, Colin. 90 different groups from Mexico to Canada. And this is the first article on psilocybin that they've published in their 40-year history. So it's really exciting to see that more groups are starting to be open about, you know, all of our different mushroom friends. And then this Friday, I'm going to the Northeast Mycological Federation's annual foray and giving an hour-long talk on psilocybin advocacy. And again, that's the first time in their long history that they've had an open discussion on psilocybin. So the fact that all of these things are happening, you know, kind of fast and furious is really incredible. Kind of like mushrooms appearing overnight. Okay. Oh, and in August, Collar City Mushrooms and some other friends went up to the Adirondacks. And there was a festival there, a one-day festival called Mushroom Mania. And we, you know, had our regular farm stuff, but we also had a section on psilocybin advocacy because North Country folks are some of the people that were really lacking in New York. So if you know anyone that lives, you know, north of Saratoga that might be interested in psilocybin advocacy, please encourage them to get in touch with us and to get involved. And there was one of the executive directors of an Adirondack Mycological Society that was there. And, he kind of pulled me aside and had a discussion about how they've, obviously not been as vocal about their appreciation of various mushrooms in the past, but didn't realize how much change had been happening in the rest of the state. And so he was going to his group to say, hey, we should get involved. So hopefully we get some more people in the North Country involved out of that. And one of the things that we need to start wrapping our heads around is various groups that may object to accessible psilocybin and kind of formulate plans for how to massage their beliefs into more open impression. And it sounds like it might be antithetical to our efforts, but we want to get in touch with people that might actually actively oppose legislation. So if anyone has any ideas for some groups, I know we talked about maybe statewide PTA or, because, and people mentioned law enforcement, but to be honest, every law enforcement group that I've spoken to is not opposed to accessible psilocybin, because they are first responders who suffer from PTSD and other trauma, and they have seen the research and they know that it can benefit them, and they do not like the fact that they have to enforce the laws that are on the books right now. Yes.
So I'm just curious, what are people's objections? Like, what are some common arguments?
Sure. The kids will get it. People will drive while they're under the influence. Those are basically the only two that I've heard so far. Now, it will always be illegal to drive impaired.
Right.
So that's not something to me, that's not really an argument for accessibility. And there is now a host of bodies of research coming out about specifically psilocybin for minors in treating ADHD and various things. I mean, right now we drug our kids with so many things. And one of the when I was speaking with Nawaz, he went a gentleman at the Cluster Busters thing that we went to last week, and he was saying he went to his physician and was saying that he's starting to use psilocybin, and he's like, well, we don't have any history of what the long-term effects are. And he listed off, rattled off 4 of the medications that he's been prescribed. And he's like, there's no long-term history of what these impacts are going to be. How can you say, don't take this natural substance, but it's all right for me to take these derived things and hope for the best? So, to me, that is also a non-argument. But basically, that's the one thing that I've heard over and over again is that you got to keep kids from getting it, which, I mean, you would, that would be built into the law. And then, but the other thing, and this is what I brought up, is there are groups called moms who microdose. And I did a quick search on
That's the thing,
moms who microdose the other day, and I think there were, it went multiple beyond 3 pages. And people on Oprah, people on NPR, people on Good Housekeeping. So there were so many articles specifically on moms microdosing to be better functioning mothers and how it has helped them be better parents and appreciate the joy of being with their children more so than the SSRIs and things that they've been prescribed, specifically for people on treatment-resistant depression. So I don't even think the PTA groups really are going to object to it. That's my feeling. So but still, we want to try to find some people that would oppose it.
Henry, I was thinking that perhaps some of the real objection would be coming from the pharmaceutical company, but they would use, front groups possibly to, pound these kind of arguments. And of course, what about the psychotic breakdown that someone's going to have? What's going to happen then? They'll use those kind of arguments. But that's the real opposition, I would think.
Yeah, I agree. And during our spotlight on mental health awareness last year, or this year rather, there was a group of pharmacists also protesting or advocating for something, or lobbying for something, and many people came up to our tables and looked at our research, or already knew or talked about Seeing Fantastic Fungi, talked about what Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind book, and they were like, this is going to put us out of business. So
exactly, yeah.
So yeah, that is, I mean,
They didn't even sound that mad about it.
no, they didn't sound that mad about it. Well, because and I think during our legislative meeting on Monday, I think someone brought up the fact that there's already pharmaceutical companies investing in psychedelic companies to get behind, that research and have their dollars, well, have their pockets ready to be filled by psychedelic dollars, essentially.
Sure. The other question I was wanted to put forth is, with that California bill, I think that's a huge deal. And is this an opportunity for us to put some pressure on our politicians? And why not here? Well, what's your response to this? Tish James, what do you think about it? As the Attorney General, was this something you would think would be beneficial? Try and provoke a response.
Yeah, so in our advocacy efforts, again and again, we heard that New York is not impacted by what other states do. Now, whether that's just lip service,
Sure,
or how accurate that actually is, but I know Nick Guile is here from Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal, and Assemblymember Rosenthal has put forth a psilocybin decrim bill many years in a row, and so that
nothing's happened.
and nothing has happened as of yet. But last year, this previous legislative session, come on in. Her bill got a lot more co-sponsors than it had in previous years. So
yeah, all from New York City too, basically.
Yeah, but that is definitely showing that there is movement and there is interest. And I definitely think that if Newsom signs this bill, whether people say they're not influenced by other states or not, California is a trendsetter. And I mean, if they flip this bill and actually, it starts to roll out, we just have to point out the dollars that people are missing out. As I'm not the biggest capitalist. Yes, I own my own business, but I believe me, I'm not making any money. but it's, New York looks at dollars, and that is what we have to hit them with. So, that is definitely
cost. I think the treatment option is would of course save huge amount of money, I would think, but that's where they'll find the savings. But just to put them on the spot from a political standpoint, if Newsom signs, can we use the media? And would we do a press release saying we note with interest and blah 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 that this development, and would hope to see something coming similar in New York State, and put that out and ask our people.
So Patrick, you should join our legislative committee meetings that meet at 3:30 on Mondays, because we are working on that.
Oh, exactly. Okay, I'd love to, Avery, because I think this is time to strike. At least on a decrim.
There is a lot of really exciting things happening in New York, and it's nothing that I can disclose publicly quite yet, but it's definitely, we're moving a lot of pieces behind the scenes.
Well, if you want to send me a link to that, I'd be happy to participate.
Sure, absolutely.
If you could send that link in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, I cut someone off, but I'm interested as well.
Great.
Do you have any support in advocacy from the medical community?
I
do you
mean,
think-
so individual doctors and
Yep.
things like that have expressed support. We haven't gotten organizations quite yet. We're talking with the NAMI, the mental health group, and I think the nationwide NAMI has expressed support, and we're working with some local folks.
No,
in-
you talk to
and I
What about the doctor from the VA? Is he can come back?
the doctor, oh, Mark, or
Yeah, because I mean, like the VA, if they're starting to roll out the trials, like.
Yeah,
like, they
that-
would be-
well, that is, oh, I
know what I
forgot
mean?
about that.
That's-
Yeah, I went to a family gathering thing on Saturday, and one of my mom's cousin's husbands in the VA and is actually starting a psilocybin microdose trial with the VA hospital. And so if they are actually actively rolling something out, then there has to be
That's huge.
doctors.
That's national.
That's
too.
national. That's the VA. That's federal,
Yeah.
right? And one of the other things I've spoken with, and I don't know if he's dialed in. I don't see his name there, but there is a chaplain working in hospice care at St. Peter's, and he is interested. He's writing a textbook on hospice care, and he has an entire chapter on
Are you
psilocybin.
available?
I'm here, Avery.
Oh, you are?
Ah,
Great.
Yes.
Is that the A, Aaron?
No,
Okay, great.
yeah, great to join.
Yeah, and so one of the things that
what's his
we,
name?
yeah, do you want to introduce yourself real quick? And
Yeah, sure. My name is Joseph Markowski. I'm a professor of philosophy and religion, and I'm also a interfaith chaplain for St. Peter's Hospice, working with end-of-life care, spiritual care for patients and families, and very much motivated in regard to psilocybin as being a conduit for individual sacrality and healing to be realized in that end of life stage of people's lives.
yeah, and one of the things that, oh, where'd you go? Oh, we talked about is potentially, working with the hospital to set up a trial locally with hospice care. And so if we can get St. Peter's to agree to it, then someone could just nudge Albany Med and be like, oh, by the way, St. Peter's is doing this trial. And I think that we could really create a huge opportunity for people to engage with psilocybin as a healing means here in the capital region. And I think that's, yeah, I'm so excited to further that discussion, Joseph. But that would be incredible. Okay, well, those were my announcements, and I want to turn it over to Colin real quick. And let me introduce Colin is the executive director of the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society. And he entered the psychedelic space after losing a friend to suicide in 2014. After his friend's death, he had therapeutic experience on MDMA in a community setting that changed his life for the better. This experience led him to joining BPS during its founding in 2015. And BPS's mission is to serve as a prototype of a psychedelic co-op, a democratically governed membership community that facilitates healing, growth, and transformation with the help of expanded states of consciousness. BPS's vision is to make psychedelic healing and community a publicly accessible good through a nationwide network of psychedelic co-ops. Colin is originally from Syracuse, New York, and has been living in Brooklyn for 9 years. And Colin, I am super excited that you're here. And let me just put this into speaker view. And if everyone else online could please mute their microphones.
One quick question, Avery. How big is the screen for the people who are there locally? Is it like a laptop?
No, I don't know.
It's like a TV.
18 by 24? Can you,
Okay, because I was
Gary,
gonna
can you see this in the
present
back?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna present some things in, but I'll keep it mostly verbal. But no, thank you for the intro, Avery. I'm ready to go whenever you are. All right, I'm just gonna do it. Hey everybody, I'm Colin Pugh. Thank you for the intro, Avery. As Avery shared, I got into the psychedelic space in 2014 after losing a close friend to suicide. And he jumped off the Tappan Zee Bridge here in New York. And it was one of the first kind of capital T traumas I had experienced. I grew up in a pretty stable middle-class life, gratefully so, in Syracuse, New York, as Avery mentioned. And after my friend died, it was pretty difficult to process his passing. He was 29 when he passed. So after that happened, I took MDMA, as Avery shared, at a rave. I use quotes because it was in Syracuse, so it's much different than the raves here in New York City. We gave it a fair shot. Took it at a quote rave, and I took enough MDMA, but didn't really kick in until the after party. And I think that was supposed to happen at the after party because it was much more relaxed and chill there. And I just sat on a couch and processed a whole bunch of emotions I had no idea I had weighing on me. It was like this shell that in my heart melted away, and I just felt this infinite pool of love underneath. I just processed a filing cabinet worth of emotions that I had on my back that had been carrying around with me for a while, including my friend's death. There's also things I didn't know I had weighing on me. I was 23 at the time. And so after that, I noticed a lot of changes to my sober life. To give you one example, my mom was yelling at me in the kitchen about something around this time. It was like 2 weeks after I took MDMA. And normally when a parent's yelling at you, you're gonna like ratchet up an argument back and, yell back at them or argue back. And at this time I felt nothing but unbridled compassion for my mom, not just as my mom, but as a mother worried about her son hurting himself. And I just saw this all at once, my mom, and a mother. And I started to tear up. And my mom was just looking at me like, are you crying right now? And I said, yes, Mom, I took an illegal drug a few weeks ago, and I feel a lot of love for you as my mom. And she was like, okay, we need to get you help. We're going to get you a therapist. This is not good. Something's wrong here. And I was acting erratically because I was going through a spiritual emergence, which I did not know. Long story short, I just began to wonder and wish that my friend who passed had a similar experience that I had had with MDMA. He was from a pretty well-off family, also from New York, from Scarsdale. So we had therapists, psychiatrists, etc., available to him, and still took his own life. So after I noticed changes in my life, I moved to Brooklyn, New York, where I last spent a lot of time with him. And because I just love the city. And so I moved here and joined the organization I'm now leading, Brooklyn Psychedelic Society, the very next summer in 2015 to try to better understand my experience. So thank you again, Avery, for introducing me. I just wanted to share that intro as well. And yeah, so here we are today. I've been organizing in psychedelic spaces in New York for 8 years. And this is going to sound crazy, but I did not go to college for psychedelic society management. So it's been a learning in progress, but it's been a really informative 8 years of learning and ups and downs. But over the years of organizing and meeting probably thousands of people who are taking psychedelics, usually underground, I noticed a trend in that what seemed to be most beneficial to people was the community and the connection and the bonds they were having around their psychedelic use, in addition to, or maybe even more than just the psychedelics themselves. Like people would have an experience and then come to our meetings, process them together, and that seemed to be having a lot of traction. So in 2020, after organizing the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society, or BPS, for 5 years, you may have heard there was a pandemic in 2020. I don't want to break the news, So I had a lot more time to focus on Brooklyn psychedelic site, and I brought on some awesome volunteers who are in the community here in New York. And a friend of mine, someone working with us who is a social worker in Vermont, clued me into the co-op model for businesses. And a co-op is a business that is owned or governed by the people producing the goods and services and or using them. So it is a community owned or governed organization. And at first, when the person shared with me what co-ops were, I was like, oh, you mean the place to buy expensive dried mango? And she said, yeah, that too, but also community-owned businesses. So a kind of light bulb went off that this is what I think we need for this kind of community process that I've been seeing over the past 8 years at Brooklyn Psychedelic Society. So I'm going to share a short presentation that I give to donors. I'm going to try to keep my whole thing around 20 minutes. I'm 6 minutes in, so we can leave time for questions, but I'm just gonna share can I share my screen, Avery, if you don't mind? Thank you. Okay. So this is my pitch deck. No expectation to donate, but you're always welcome to if you'd like. So maybe some of you have heard psychedelics are catalyzing a bit of a revolution right now in mental health. But unfortunately, the main way we're going to be delivering psychedelics, it looks like, is through our healthcare system. So while the system is useful and beneficial for many, it does come with a few problems for delivering it through the healthcare model. One is that it is quite expensive in the medical model. Even in Oregon, where state-regulated versions were legalized, it's estimated to cost between $2,000 and $3,000 for a mushroom experience. It's also very difficult to scale. You need trained facilitators and therapists to be alongside you for a medical or regulated experience. It also doesn't really address isolation, which is one of the main causes of many of these conditions that psychedelics are treating. And if we know that isolation is a cause of the conditions psychedelics treat, one reason our current mental health system is failing is because it's treating symptoms rather than causes. So we know isolation causes these conditions, but we're not doing anything to address isolation. We're setting ourselves up to repeat the same mistakes in just treating symptoms, but with better tools. So I think the medical model isn't the optimal cultural container for psychedelic delivery. So what do I mean by a cultural container? Let me see if I can. So a cultural container is a setting in our society that is socially embedded, where a process takes place that society deems beneficial and acceptable. For example, where do you go to drink coffee? Go to cafes. Where might one go for recovery from alcoholism? AA. Where do you go for getting fit? The gym. And where do you go right now for transformational healing? So community-based healing is a process that has been taking place for millennia in human history, like with indigenous groups and Native American groups. The West has been doing it in community for maybe a few decades. We're a little late to the party. Psychedelic societies got started in early 2010, so they're not that old. We've been around since 2015. I think the oldest is SF, San Francisco Psychedelic Society, since 2010. And this process is kind of how psychedelics are done naturally. I'm guessing for most of us, our introduction to psychedelics was through a friend or a group. It wasn't a clinical study. Maybe in the future, that'll be the more common way. But I think psychedelics and that experience are predisposed to doing them in community. So right now, we know that the process is community-based healing. Like that's a process that takes place in our culture, but we don't have a container for it that kind of distills it down, harnesses it, and delivers it. So where do you go for transformational healing? Surprise, psychedelic co-ops. What? It's not Costco? Maybe. Costco hasn't replied to my emails yet. So psychedelic co-ops, I think, are a very highly viable theoretical place where community-based psychedelic healing can take place. What is a psychedelic co-op? It's a democratically governed community-based healing center that provides safe, legal, so you know, Nick, psychedelic journeys alongside programming centered around human well-being and flourishing. So I made this deck before I knew about UK Psychedelic Society, and I thought they do not yet exist. UK Psychedelic Society, props to them, already actually is a nonprofit psychedelic co-op. So I'm in touch with them and going to hopefully import some of their learnings, quite literally import, into what we're doing here in the States, but they do exist. What I'm working on now is creating a model that can be replicated by the other societies and similar community groups around the country. So we still have a purpose here, but it's slightly changed. So our mission at Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is to serve as a prototype of this psychedelic co-op. So again, a psychedelic co-op is two things. It's a place where you get community-based healing, but it's also a democratically governed container for where that healing takes place. So I'm envisioning that if we can successfully make a exportable model that any community, Collar City Mushrooms, SF Psychedelic Society, or a neighborhood that wants healing for its members can form a community healing center using the community healing methodology plus a democratically governed container to deliver that method. So process, container, and then culture, like building culture around community-based healing and co-ops. So this is a template of a community-based healing modality called Trellis that we are working on. It involves 5 stages. So just to back up, we talked about psychedelic co-op. A psychedelic co-op is a place that delivers community-based healing, but what does community-based healing actually look like? So I think we have good reason to suspect that community-based healing is an answer to the kind of expensive nature of a more medical or regulated approach. Few reasons for that. One, it's just doing things in groups makes it cheaper than doing it one-on-one. 2 is that you can actually have the community serve as a form of checks and balances for safety mechanisms with the facilitators, the staff, and the participants to kind of look out for one another. So it might not require as much overhead for running it. But a metaphor I've used for describing the current state of community-based healing across the country is like, we know we need to make grassroots lemonade stands pop up around the country, but no one really knows yet what the recipe is for lemonade. And it's not just lemonade, but it's iced tea, Arnold Palmer's, etc. So community-based healing as a process needs to kind of be defined. Like, what does that look like? So the Trellis modality is kind of our operating system, which we're going to make open source for thinking about that process. So there's a discernment phase, a preparation phase, a journeying phase, integration, and then a post-integration phase, like linking up with other people in your neighborhood and community who are working on similar areas of healing and growth, whether that is depression, anxiety, addiction, rehabilitating relationships with estranged friends or family members, or more positive psychology type help with like getting a creative practice going again, or just, learning how to dance or something like that. We all have things we're working on. So the idea is that, I don't want to say the community is the dirt, it's the soil though, that we're all kind of planted in, and the programming of a psychedelic co-op helps people blossom. The idea, this is a little Plato's cavey, but the sun is kind of the psychedelic experience that helps us kind of open up. But then you need the kind of support of the community and the programming to help you grow. So the idea is these psychedelic co-ops kind of act as a trellis to help people blossom. So this is the process, community-based healing. Trellis is our kind of take on that, what that could look like. And then the container. So this is practicing democratic governance for psychedelic communities. Democratic governance in the context of cooperatives means that the board is this is one version of it's probably the simplest. The board is either democratically elected by the staff and or the customers, or the board is made up of the staff and or the customers. What we are doing at Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is using a kind of hybrid model where we have a 9-person board, and there's a few seats for workers and a few seats for community members, but it's all voted on by the staff, myself included, and my 3 part-time staff members. So democratic governance is really important. Another really important thing is to how to make these financially viable, which I'll show in another graphic soon. But I think there's going to be different kind of market segments for these co-ops. It's not going to be all like, a community might not have the resources to put together a safe container for community-based healing, and those should be supported and helped philanthropically, which is part of my work, is helping to see, hey, there is a modality here that needs support beyond just what the venture market can handle. And lastly, we're trying to build culture around community-based healing and psychedelic co-ops. We did change the name of our podcast to Community is the Medicine. Transformation Shared will be something else, but building a culture and a movement around the need for community-based healing and psychedelic co-ops. So here are some pictures from our community events. We have been around for a while, so it takes time to build up momentum and run these events. But I'm just really proud and admire the work Avery has been doing and Corinne up in Troy with organizing and bringing people together. I think you're doing an awesome job. And there's something here that we're not just doing in Brooklyn, you're not just doing in Troy, we're all figuring something out here of what community-based healing looks like. So let me show one more graphic here. Okay, so psychedelics are kind of becoming all the rage, as we know, and there's obviously going to be an industry and a market that is created around psychedelics. So I think there's going to be kind of a 3-lane highway for what the psychedelic market is going to look like, and that is the above, the decrim/gray/black market if you're not in Oregon, Colorado, or potentially California. So basically 95% of states, the state regulated market, which is going to be regulated psilocybin service centers like in Oregon and Colorado, and then the federally regulated market, which is FDA approved treatments like ketamine and MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD once that comes online. So within these 3 markets, there's kind of 3 key vectors to kind of think about these. It's safety, accessibility, and effectiveness. For example, federally regulated market, you're getting ketamine with a doctor who's taking your vitals, making sure you're A-okay all the time. There's people right there to make sure everything's good. There's like a prep session integration, super safe, also super expensive, not exactly cheap. It's going to cost a lot because you're using professionals' services to ensure that safety. And then you have the decrim gray market, which what I'm trying to talk to philanthropists about and get them to see is that while the state market in Oregon and Colorado and the federally regulated market is they're both coming online. It is going to be a very small percentage of the pie of how most people are going to be taking psychedelics. The vast majority of people across the United States are going to be reading about how psychedelics help addiction, PTSD, suicidality, a whole host of conditions. And they're going to think I can either fly to Oregon or Costa Rica, or I can talk to my buddy Steve, who has a mushroom plug. It's like, these are it's what are they going to do? Sorry to any Steves out there. No, you're doing God's work, okay? It's, Steve's like, what the fuck? So that's not cool, Avery. I thought we talked. Steve's leaving. Steve, come back. Don't leave. So, the decrim gray market is how the vast majority of people are going to be engaging with psychedelics. So what is needed is a community-based model that ideally is usable in all three lanes. And the idea is that our trellis model is going to be a model that can be used starting in the decrim gray market. We think this is the first one to focus on because it's going to have the most impact for how the vast majority of people are going to be taking psychedelics. So some things we are working on at Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is a vetted facilitator list. Now, these aren't people who are necessarily working with substances underground, but they have experience providing integration and preparation services for these medicines. But they're people we've talked to make sure they are adequately prepared to help you get ready or afterwards after your trip. We also have a community stewards committee of people in our community from the LGBTQ background, the Black community, eventually men's groups we're hoping, and women's groups. Community stewards are people who either with certain backgrounds or focus areas they've worked on who are community members. We can refer to them like these are trusted people who've gone through a psychedelic experience and have been helped. So the hope is that we can make this model, the psychedelic co-op model and the community-based healing process work for the decrim gray market, and we can get enough information on how this works and have it philanthropically supported to create a community-based ecosystem that occupies all three lanes, and each one helps fund the other. So if I know, for instance, that my mom, someone is like, oh, I'm really depressed, no one like my mom will like, oh, I'll go to Brooklyn Psychedelic Society and read the Stam Groff LSD book. And no, they're going to want to go to a federally regulated, a state regulated. And the idea is if we can have a community-based ecosystem where a similar model is being used, but at different price points, that each one can support the other. And hopefully we can help fund some community services in states that it is still a Black market in. So in a nutshell, the vision is to one day have a community where one can experience transcendence, personal growth, and emotional healing in a safe container at whatever cost is affordable to them nationwide. We want to make this available to people like libraries do for books with proper escalation protocols in place. I don't think psychedelics are for every single human walking the earth, but I do think they can help a lot of people. And also one last thing, because I am a hippie after all, if we limit if we limit these psychedelics to just the medical system, there are so many other benefits to these things. As the professor shared earlier, religion and philosophy, there's so many other benefits with how we relate to ourselves, to our families, to our communities, to nature, to the environment, that a strictly medical approach isn't going to allow to actually germinate. So we are hoping that our model can be used to facilitate some change and make psychedelic healing a publicly accessible good. I'm trying to find a pithy. I don't have anyone. This is our community. Yes, so that's pretty much it. Create a nationwide network of psychedelic co-ops with our community and others serving as a prototype that's both prototyping the process of community-based healing as well as the container. And yeah, I really appreciate being here. I really appreciate the work NYMHA is doing, and thank you for having me.
Unmuted before we applauded. Wow, Colin, that was amazing. Yeah. I love that the community is the medicine. Is that the name of the podcast? That is
Yes, it is. I'd
And
love to have you and some people from Collar City on at some point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But in that first slide is, where does transformational healing happen? I mean, I love that you're creating a container that is not based on a specific religious practice, because so often people are like, oh, I'm going to create this religious experience where, it's spiritual, it's connecting, it generates empathy and community, but it's not necessarily I believe in this specific path kind of thing. And I think that that's really important for people to not get pigeonholed into. But in my head, every like I went through like, oh, well, it was at this festival or at this like big party thing, which yeah, it can happen, when you're taking these medicines and it's gonna drive you down a specific road, depending on where your head is. But those aren't necessarily the best containers. It's like, oh wow, now I'm like lost from my friends and suddenly I'm having a challenging experience. So I absolutely love this model that you're creating.
Thank you, Avery.
Any
If I could
oh,
add on that briefly, I totally hear you with the religious plurality. We live in a postmodern pluralistic world, and a secular culture to me doesn't mean no religion. It just means people are going to have different religious inclinations and backgrounds. Like I myself am a practicing Christian. I don't go around like gallivanting that and sharing that with every person in the psychedelic scene, but I think it needs to be, what I envision is at these co-ops would there be like sub communities or subgroups or community stewards of different religious proclivities, that if someone wants to do a Buddhist thing or a Christian thing or a neo-pagan or shamanic or a combination of the above, there can be groups for that. I still think this is a model that churches can use, but I think in order for this community healing movement to really take hold in our culture, it has to be pliable and flexible enough for a diversity of religious views. And that doesn't mean no religion, just means those groups have to be in the container within their own subgroups.
Yeah, well, but it's about being open, and that's part of it, is like, oh, well, you're experiencing divinity in your way. Great, like celebrate that, but don't say you can't do that. Never say that, but like, unless they're hurting people, obviously. But it's like, yeah, that is awesome. Yeah. So anyone virtually, anyone in person have any questions for Colin?
Yeah, actually, I do have a question for Colin. Colin, Patrick, I'm also in Brooklyn, by the way. But I'm wondering, has the society been set up as a non-profit under like a 501c something, or a state not-for-profit? The reason I'm asking, and you were talking about the religious overtones, but there have been churches established under not-for-profit law where they are talking about psychedelics as part of their ceremony and using them. They've done it kind of with a Christian framework, but it, as you were saying, it could be completely secular and but the same kind of concept. Establish these societies as nonprofits, as religious type institutions, spiritual institutions. So is that what your model is, your legal framework, or you're just doing it?
Well, the church model is not, we're not registered as a church, nor do I think psychedelics also already have enough cultural baggage for people to get over, I think. And we're like, well, this is a psychedelic church.
Yeah.
No
let's not
shade
use the
on
word
churches.
church. Let's not use the word church, but use
Well,
that exemption. It's not a Christian thing. As you say, it's a non-denominational universalist type of healing process, transformation. I don't know. You use the same concept for your type of society.
maybe I think it comes down to like a branding cultural
Yeah.
difference where the churches would have to be more front and center how their spiritual beliefs align with their ingestion of psychedelics. We do happen to have an expert on the call. I don't want to put her on the spot, Allison Hoots. But I think for cultural purposes, this should be legal to do, no matter what religion you believe in or your proclivities are. So I'm hoping these co-ops can be secular containers that are just, we are a 50, we are fiscally sponsored by MAPS, but we are on our way to getting our own C3 status. So we are a traditional New York State nonprofit.
Oh, great. That's excellent.
Allison, did you want to chime in there, or?
Might be listening in.
Oh goodness. No, hi. I was actually just starting to type, but I was gonna say, under federal RFRA, state RFRA, potentially a state constitutional protection of religious exercise, technically any religious exercise could potentially be protected if that exercise included a psychedelic. It doesn't have to be a church. It's, more likely that a church's use would be more understandable and digestible by a court in its analysis. And we just haven't seen a lot of cases where just an individual's religious beliefs with something like this has been protected. So I do think Colin's right that if you brought in someone who could establish clearly sincere religious use, and they were offering a sacramental ceremony under the umbrella of a co-op like this, it's certainly arguably defensible. And I love this idea, and I think that religion in its analysis is broadening to some degree, but we're also expecting the courts to keep up with some of these modern beliefs, and that is definitely a lot to expect, considering incremental changes.
Yeah, I mean, New Age shamanism with ceremonial use of psychedelics and natural plants. That should be protected, as much as a more traditional religious expression and experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're seeing just generally religious practices being protected, the converts, the more unique outlier beliefs, right? So, but when it then comes to psychedelics, there's just certain other criteria around safety and prevention of diversion to non-religious uses that would be scrutinized. So those would be what would come up in this context, right? So anyway, this is a much longer conversation, but I think
thank you, though. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Colin is right. I think there are ways in which there is this hybrid where they could intersect in these models.
And we have a question in person too, unless you have some more, Allison. I kind of cut you off there.
Oh gosh, no. Thanks for calling me in though, Colin.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Allison.
I have a question. So you're talking about the 3-pronged model. So in that most expensive tier, are you talking about setting up, like, for instance, like ketamine clinics with like medical providers and nurses and like billing through insurance? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's a generalization. I don't want to say that speaks for all of them, but I imagine the most expensive ones will involve those settings because it's more staff, more people, more administrative costs.
Yeah, like medical facilities.
Yeah. Well,
Basically, yeah.
and I don't think Colin, I am not to put words in your mouth, but Colin, I don't think is saying that as a co-op, they're establishing that, but they're creating a container through which all of these modes can be accessed. And that where, I just was speaking with a social worker or therapist friend who actually worked in California in a ketamine clinic. And it sounded like it was very antithetical to a community. It was cranking out customers.
Yeah.
Like there was no integration, there was no like preparation. It was like you came in for your 5 o'clock appointment, you left by 5:15. That was it, done. And so I would love to see that criticized, because I think that the medicine, the physical chemical only goes so far. And like Colin said, the community is what actually helps heal. Is
The integration
yeah,
afterwards.
yeah.
And also just to add on that, I do envision one day co-ops occupying that federally regulated model in a way that can hopefully fund the other cooperatives. That might not work because all the regulations with the federal versions of it might be too complicated, but I think basically the community-based cooperative should hopefully occupy all three lanes. It might be under different brands and companies, but yeah.
Can you explain a little more how you imagine that would look like for those three different lanes?
Yeah, so one hypothetical I have in my head is that, well, a lot of like if you think of the mind if I share my screen again? Okay, can you see this? So I'm seeing there kind of these three different prongs of like the decrim gray market. While it's the most affordable, these are the organizations that are exposing themselves to the most liability, right? Because they're interfacing with practitioners who might be working underground, but it's still how most people are probably going to be using psychedelics. So, for instance, in Colorado right now, I believe it is legal, according to our attorney who's based in Colorado. It's legal. You can't buy mushrooms or pay for mushroom services, but you can pay for the cost of the space and like any ceremonial support from people. But it's difficult to build a business around decriminalized things because you can't get insurance. You might not be able to open a bank account. But this market's still going to be like the biggest part of the pie, I think. So I'm imagining these being like hyper local communities like Brooklyn Psychedelic Society, SF Psychedelic Society. They're kind of working on the margins. Then there's going to be state regulated centers, like there's some in Oregon and some in Colorado that are popping up, that they're operating in the state regulated market, like selling psilocybin services, but they have the law to back them up to hire people to approve their facilitation experience, to get insurance, all these things that makes it more sustainable to someone actually build a life and career around, like that's what's going to actually create these economies. And then the federally regulated market already is in existence for the most part with like ketamine clinics and when all these different like compass pills and things like that come out. And I used to be a little more radical, like fuck the pharmaceuticals and like against all that as a whole. But I think actually it's
in sports, physically athletic, and I still use my phone.
Say it again.
I don't think it was
Also, the main thing that he does it for our mental health. But what the You know what the cherry on top of this is?
Someone mute Robert, please.
Cool.
Thank you.
Because
Sorry.
Was that
I don't think it was, or Robert, were you trying to interject?
okay? Sound like an interesting point. Anyways, yeah, where was I? The ketamine clinics are already a dime a dozen. A lot of them shut down and maybe will be, but to answer your question, Zana, in my head, I'm imagining that still, like, even though most of the population will be engaging in psychedelics in the decrim gray market, I think most of the financing for it and the economic part of the pie will be at this end of the spectrum to start, because most people in America are going, I mean, who have healthcare and finances are going to be comfortable only engaging in psychedelics with a doctor on hand. So on the left, you kind of have like the grassroots, like people critical mass, and this one's the kind of financial. In my head, in my 2 years of having staff and a little funding to work on this project, I'm thinking that the community-based healing sector needs to have a different brands and businesses in each of these lanes to support each other. So there might be some brand that we have that is for a federally regulated market, but a portion of those funds goes to support the launching of state centers and or fund the nonprofits doing the decrim gray market work. Does that make sense? So my hope is that there's kind of you're going to have the psychedelic ecosystem as a whole, and then there's going to be the community-based ecosystem, and then what we're working on is kind of one continuum of that helps support each other one, like a Plinko ball. But I'm not sure. This is like all hypothetical, but that's how I see it shaking out.
Well, I like one of the first meetings you came to in person here at the farm, Colin, when you talked about needing to re-envision our healthcare system because psychedelics would not fit in what our healthcare system looks like now. And that has stuck with me. And I definitely think that is absolutely accurate. And I think what you've envisioned and what you've laid out here does that.
I think so too. I think the focus is going to be on the first two lanes and less the federally regulated one. A phrase I've been saying is that we are modifying psychedelics to fit into our current system, and we need to change our system to fit around psychedelics, people, and communities.
Yeah,
that's the task at hand. So I'm hoping the models we're developing can help facilitate that. The federally regulated part is more like, well, how are we going to fund this on our own? And I'm hoping that philanthropy can help us do it in the first two lanes without having to also do the federal regulated option.
Right. And that, all that being said, the AMA actually has created a code for psychedelic assisted therapy. So once it does start rolling out at a federal level, that insurance code is already created. So, you know, when insurance companies come online, there's not going to, hypothetically, there shouldn't be a hiccup for that.
There's also a national association of psychedelic medicine for physicians. So, and can I make a comment about the ketamine clinics?
Yeah.
There are some ketamine. Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There are some ketamine clinics that are, much smaller, and much more holistic and person-oriented. And I know myself, there are some physicians that are actually doing pro bono work because they want to be able to, to have for all patients to have access, basically. And I don't know what there is available as far as fundraising or what they're able to do at this time, if anything, to raise money for some of these patients. But a lot of the doctors are getting together with the therapist and, prescribing and also guiding with the therapist, and splitting the cost. So some of the patients can have a therapy session or have a reduced price to have like a sliding scale. So I think
That's all. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Sorry.
happening more and more. It's not, I mean, I'm a physician, so I'm against like these high-paced, infusion clinics that are just there to make money.
Right.
And nothing else. But there are exceptions to that. And I just don't think we have a voice. I don't think these smaller scale clinics yet have a voice or know how to fundraise
Right.
for the patients that can't.
Are they gathering in some way?
Not that I know of.
So maybe that's something that needs to happen,
Yeah.
because as community, it is embracing the
Yeah.
people that are creating these similar things and showing that there is a wave of people doing this, because that's how you get the word out that that's happening. Yeah.
Yeah, we're hoping to help build, thank you for that comment. And that is one of the main reasons I do want to find aligned federal practitioners or medical doctors who, because it's a continuum. And I think we need all three lanes to work together to provide this service. So there can be community-based healing through insurance, through a state program, through DCRIM. And yeah, we're hoping to have a national org that coordinates these different groups across the different spectrum of the lanes. So let's say someone is coming from maybe a DCRIM or a psychedelic society and something they have to get escalated to a doctor, then we have this network of other medically supervised practitioners they can work with that are aligned ethos-wise and ethically with a community bent to them. So I think it's got to be a diverse market of all three lanes working together. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, that if you are trying to help somebody in the decrim market that isn't getting the support that they need there, if you have this more expansive network and support team, you're able to kind of get them to where they need to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and that's part of the emphasis on community, is creating a network of like, oh, you're not comfortable hanging out with your friends by a bonfire. You need a little bit more hand holding, or you don't need hand holding. You want that clinical setting, because so many people have come, even just here in person to the farm or attended these meetings that said like, I've been, diagnosed with depression. I've been on SSRIs since I was 14. Nothing has worked for me. I have access to these medicines, but I do not want to take them without a container. And that's, the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society creating, offering a potential container, like, oh, here's one vessel that we can drink out of. Well, I'm still not comfortable because I need someone that has, I want to see the documents on the wall that says you went through these things. Okay, great. But I know that Colin, when, one of the conversations we had, you wanted to have someone like on staff, so that if someone is there, that, they have that, oh, by the way, this person is a therapist, or this person is a clinician, or, here's our physician on staff. So we can take your blood pressure. We can, talk about your history before you engage with the medicine in this way. And so that's why I think, that psychedelic co-op model does kind of fit all of those, it checks all of those boxes.
I think
In
it's
an ideal fairy dream world, which I'm definitely down to live in, which I am living in constantly. These psychedelic co-ops would be a one-stop shop, no matter your price point, no matter your background, with therapists, with doctors. Currently, our laws make it so that you can only own a business if all the same licensures are on the ownership bill. Like, only doctors can own a doctor's office, only psychologists can own it. So, but ultimately, I think it should be somewhere it's like, where are you at financially? And hopefully the people who have the money can kind of like help support people who wouldn't be able to otherwise afford the more elevated support if they needed it.
There are some models right now where there are independent contracting therapists that come together with independent contracting physicians and treat patients together but independently. So
I saw that. Well, the financialization of healthcare, I read an article in the New York Times a few weeks ago. It's a huge problem, and doctors are feeling like they're just at the beck and whim of business people making a lot of the calls, and like doctors are getting sick of being doctors too. So the financialization of healthcare could be a major kind of like leveraging point for hopefully getting the psychedelic field off on the right foot.
You know, I wanted to just make one other comment, is that I've gone to a lot of workshops where, you know, for therapists and learn how to do that integration work. I'm a physician, but what I've seen is that the physicians and therapists that are doing this work, that are interested in psychedelics, they're not your average therapist or physician. They are people that are really, truly interested in helping humans first and foremost. And, you know, they see things differently. They have a different mentality. So I think I agree with you in that we do need to kind of forget the separateness that we have perpetuated, you know, that we are separate, and I understand both sides, what both sides are thinking and saying, but I think we have to come together and work together for the benefit of the patient that's kind of benefiting. Yeah.
Absolutely. Community is the medicine, and it's not just the community of the clients, but it's the community of the staff, of the facilitators, of the doctors, of the support, of the therapists. It's all of us.
So Colin, it's already 8:20. So does anyone online have any more questions? Because I would like to, the only other kind of new business is sort of a reference to something we started talking about last time, is we mentioned how people can get involved. And really, in order to help create systems like psychedelic co-ops, or, you know, any way that people can access these medicines that have been federally, you know, scheduled up to now, we need to contact our legislators, and especially in New York, because New York, there is no community referendums or anything. We need to like get the lawmakers to make this change. And so Corinne, who unfortunately is not able to join us, she is fortunately on vacation, drafted an email, and I just dropped a couple sections of it into the chat. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will email our group afterwards with the text of this. But this is a draft that you could send to your legislator directly, and, you know, just fill in your own specific kind of signed from, and like, you know, if you want to add a personal story, you can. But, and I've said this before, and I probably will say this every meeting, one of the things that we really have noticed is if you tell your legislator something is important, they do listen. And we heard it again and again that, oh, none of my constituents have mentioned this. And more than one legislator has said that if 10 to 20 people tell them something is important, it becomes a hot button issue. 10 to 20 people is not a lot of people. And so if everyone online, if everyone here in this room can tell just 5 people to send this email, it can really make an impact. Now, the people in our region are already super supportive. If John McDonald is your assembly member, he's a co-sponsor. You know, Amy, there are a lot of people who are already supporting this bill. Jake Ashby, the senator, he's going to sponsor the Senate bill. So like Rensselaer County, for the most part, most of Albany County is pretty much covered. But anywhere else in the state, you know, this is going to be, it really is critical. So if you have friends that are outside of the area, tell them to just here, copy and paste, put this information in, send this to your legislators. So that way, when we start meeting with legislators again, they can be like, oh, people have told me about this. This is something that I'm looking forward to. Because the only pushback we got from meeting with legislators was I want to hear more information. I've heard about this. You know, this is something that's on my radar. And if we can continue to make it, you know, put that in front of their faces, then they're going to be more informed about how many people are interested in creating change. The only other couple things that I wanted to mention is a gathering for social workers in Pennsylvania on a former asparagus farm is happening from October 5th to October 9th. They're calling it Asparagus Man. And, you know, it's going to be a festival from, like I said, October 5th to the 9th, DJs, but like daytime sessions where, you know, social workers and other clinicians can actually get together and talk about how they're already integrating these different medicines into their practice or how they want to. And then Horizons is in New York City from October 13th to 15th. And that's another, it's a gathering. And Jana, do people talk about advocacy at, oh, Jana left. Colin, do you know, you've been to Horizons before, right?
Yeah.
Are there advocacy sessions there?
There is definitely, there have been in the Northwest, which they launched last year. I think there might be some talks on it, but I don't think so yet in New York.
Yeah, because that's one of the things. There's so many different, like the Psychedelic Assembly and like the Manhattan Psychedelic Society. There's so many people doing things that are just creating social gatherings in the psychedelic space, but not necessarily advocacy. And I feel like, you know, that's something that we have to tweak. Yes, that's why we have New Yorkers. Yeah. But I definitely would like to see, you know, something more at these things. And then further out, we do have in February of 2024, Assemblymember Rosenthal's team has gotten us at least one day so far at the Capitol. And so we will be advocating again at the Capitol and engaging directly with lawmakers. And that's going to be in February. And I think we just have to nail down the date. Nick, if you're still on, I know you, I can't remember now, February 27th or something. Sticks in my head. It's close to the end of the month. No, I just saw an email today, or maybe it was yesterday about that. And then our next meeting is going to be on October 10th. So it's the second Tuesday again, and it's going to feature Dr. Sunil Kumar Agarwal, who is a physician and medical geographer. He is a board certified fellow of both the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation and the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine and Hospice Care. So he will be talking about palliative and hospice care as well. It's October 10th. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Or online. Right. So Colin, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your presentation, and I know that, you know, it was I can't wait to share it on our site, and I'll link you to it. So that was fantastic.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, and thank you for the great questions, everybody. Appreciate it. This was really fun. Thank you, Avery.
Yeah. But does anyone else have any other new business, new news? Well, fantastic. So thank you all for joining us, and I will end the recording now somehow.
Thank you, guys.